I'm Danielle Smith, president of the Alberta Enterprise Group. I'm collaborating with Common Sense Edmonton to deliver you these interviews. We're interviewing the candidates for City Council in Edmonton. And joining me now is Tarcy Schindelka, who is your candidate for Ward 8. Tarcy, thanks so much for being with me today.
Thanks for having me, Danielle.
Now, I know that they are numbered, but they also have a name. So tell us the name of the ward you're running in.
It is papastew.
Do you know what that means?
It's the name of a former chief that did a lot of good things in the Edmonton region back in the day.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the good things that you want to do in the region if you are elected. So tell us why you're running for office.
Really, it just came down to, over the years, watching my property taxes continue to increase while the city's core services and what we typically expect of a city continue to drop. A couple of years ago, a year ago, the final straw that broke my back was when they had to replace a storm sewer near my house, and it took 6 crews of people to do it. And I was kind of going, that's wasteful and takes a lot more time than it should. And that was it. I was like, okay, I got to run and hopefully make some changes for the people of Edmonton.
All right, let's talk a bit about some of the job experience that you've had. What have you done that makes you think you'd be a good city councillor?
Well, I'm a business owner for step one, and obviously you have to manage people, you have to manage money, you have to manage a lot of different things as a business owner. And so that's, even through a pandemic, I've been able to keep the business alive. It's been tough, but things like that I think really help out. And I mean, it's an entertainment company, so a lot of people might go, well, he's an entertainer, what can he do? I mean, even something as simple as playing music to a crowd of people takes some psychology and being able to read kind of the background of the room and how people are feeling and what's going on in that room too, to make sure I play the right music at the right time. So things like that I think come into play. I just love the city so much, and I've been a taxpayer here for long enough. My girls are both very much Edmontonians that I think that's really going to help in pulling forward.
All right, so you're a business owner. Now, the role of a council member is to oversee the administration. Can you talk to me a little bit about that relationship? Do you think it's working well? Do you think that anything needs to change?
You know, it's funny, talking to people while we're door knocking, you hear that, you know, there seems to be a disconnect somewhere. I chatted with one of our BIAs just a week ago, and she said that it's funny, the city manager is great, the councillors seem to be great, but somewhere in the layers between, there's a loss of customer service. So it seems to be that there's a culture that's been set somewhere inside of City Hall that needs to be fixed. And I mean, without being inside there, it's tough to really gauge, but I'd like to find out and bring that level of service back to the people of the city.
All right. I'm not very great with acronyms. What's a BIA?
Business Improvement Area. Okay. So it's the old the one I was talking to is the old Strathcona Business District. So
all right, perfect. Let's talk a little bit about the relationship with council members, because when you get elected, you're elected as an independent, but you also have to be able to get at least 7 votes in order to get any of your ideas passed. Give us some idea of how you would approach that.
I mean, really, it comes down to working together. And it's funny, with social media and the way things have gone, and I've mentioned this on my Facebook page a number of times, but it seems like there's a lot of, if you're on one side, the other person is the enemy. But realistically, somewhere in the middle is where a true solution can be found. And so even if somebody has completely different ideas from what I'm thinking, you got to collaborate and make it work. And so again, that's coming down to working with hundreds, thousands of different people in different types of events and that sort of thing. I think I can work that fairly easily, even if somebody has a completely different idea from what I have.
All right.
But based on that, I mean, just to kind of go a little bit further into that, even our general ideas, it's not ours to bring. We're there to be advocates for our constituents and the people that are part of that ward. So even if they think differently than I do, that's what my job is, to bring that forward, is kind of what they say. So.
All right. So what is it that they're telling you? Give me sort of the top 3 issues you're hearing about in your ward.
The top three really are, I mean, the transit redesign that just happened, that's affecting a lot of people, and transit in general, with the new LRT going up and that sort of thing. I've heard a lot about that. Protecting our parks is a big deal, particularly the River Valley. As you know, Edmonton's got the largest green space of any major city in the world. And we need to make sure that that stays that green space. And it's funny, I drive around a lot lately and I've been seeing how many people actually use our River Valley. It is crazy how many thousands of people are down there at any one time, particularly through the summer. But and council's talking about putting a solar farm right in the River Valley. And to me, Edmonton has enough brown space in other areas that would be perfectly viable for a solar farm. The River Valley is not it. So protecting the River Valley and our green spaces is probably the number one issue. And then we also hear a lot about homelessness. And obviously that's been an issue in Edmonton that hasn't been resolved over the last 10 years, despite having a plan in place. Whereas Medicine Hat has pretty much solved the homeless problem. And the mayor finally acknowledged that last week. But I don't know why Edmonton continues to try to reinvent the wheel when there's a solution from a city just south of us that we could call and figure out how it's worked and kind of follow that pattern.
All right, you've put a lot of issues on the table, and I want to get into those in a little bit more detail, but I want to sort of frame the discussion first off just by talking to you about what you think the role is of municipal government. There have been complaints that sometimes the city is veering off in a direction that isn't within their mandate and neglecting core services. Do you think that's a legitimate complaint?
I very much do. I mean, they're stepping into sometimes provincial arenas that they don't need to be. On that note, you need to be able to work alongside the provincial and federal governments to make it work. But yeah, I think the city basically is here to deliver our roads, our parks and recreation, that sort of thing. And they've stepped away from that so much. So yeah, it's a very valid complaint.
Okay, let's then talk a little bit as well about some of the operational issues and spending issues, because one of the biggest issues that you face is the cost of salaried staff, salary, wages, benefits, pensions. There has also been stories about the increase in managers, middle management in particular, increasing 22% and supervisors increasing 19% since 2017. So tell me about those issues. How would you address the issue of labor costs?
I mean, realistically, you're exactly right. The city auditor put it in her report that middle management is where the cost savings can be found. And a lot of people, when you start talking about savings on salaries and stuff like that, they start thinking, well, they're going to lay everybody off. Well, that would be counterproductive based on the fact that I already think that our services are lower than they should be. The people on the front lines that are out there doing the work are doing a fantastic job with what they're given. So again, coming down to that disconnect somewhere between the city manager and the 13 layers in some departments of middle management, that's where the savings need to be found. I mean, is it a ploy right now to reduce the union's numbers? I mean, I don't know. Again, not being inside, I don't know the thoughts behind it, but realistically, through attrition and hiring freezes, that sort of thing at a middle manager level, I think that's where, retirements, that kind of thing, that's where you can easily find a lot of savings.
All right. Do you think there's a role for council to play from a leadership position in looking at their own wages and transition allowance and other benefits? Or do you think that, are you satisfied with what council members are being paid?
No, actually, and it's right on my website. I would advocate for a 10% drop in council salaries right off the hop. And I mean, yes, overall, that's basically $110,000. But I think it really shows that if we're going to be responsible with Edmontonians' tax dollars, it needs to start at the top. So I'm happy to take, a little bit of a pay cut in order to show people that we're willing to take the lead on that.
All right, let's then talk about spending from a general perspective, because a recent city auditor's report has shown that operating spending has grown by 36% above inflation and population over the last 20 years. Do you think that's a problem?
Very much so. I mean, to continue to spread the city out and have to put in new infrastructure and then not take care of the infrastructure that's already there. Whereas why spend so much in order to attract people to a city that you can't take care of in the first place. It comes down to why. Let's get that in line first off. Why over inflation? What's the need for that? Why overpopulation growth? Where are we putting that money? Let's figure that out. And capital projects are a big part of that. Whereas we continue to come in over budget and late.
I want to talk about capital projects, but just staying a minute on operating spending. Do you think that the amount the city is spending is too much, too little, or about right? And depending on how you answer that, do you see any place where you think you could find efficiencies?
Well, that's, it comes down to, again, like we talked before, the efficiencies, there's a culture there in spend to the budget or you won't get it next year. And that is one thing that obviously that's why the budget continues to grow, but the services stay exactly the same. So, or less. You look at my street cleaning in the winter, it's non-existent as opposed to where they used to come and clear the street right off. So, it needs to come under control, Danielle. Where do you do it? I think if you incentivize the managers to find those efficiencies and they get a monetary bonus later on, I think that would be a big step. I think the next part would be, okay, let's separate their budgets out. Here's your wage budget. Here's your operational budget. And let's, if you can find efficiencies here without laying a bunch of people off, fantastic. But this is where we need to find out how we can save some money. And it comes down to stories of renting a jackhammer and doing one job with it. And that jackhammer is in rent for 4 days, 3 or 4 days, as opposed to one. It's little things like that, but it very much adds up over the course of a year in a size of a corporation, the size of the city of Edmonton.
Were you giving an actual example?
It's something I have heard from a former employee, yes.
All right. Okay, let's then talk about the tax side of the equation. Do you think taxes are too high, too low, or about right?
Well, I think they are too high. Based on the fact that I've been paying taxes and seeing those numbers continue to go up each and every year. They finally put a freeze on this year, which was fantastic. But I think the fact that the city's sitting on a bunch of money in the bank, plus a $40 million surplus last year, allows them to, they could have knocked it back a little bit. That would have been nice as a taxpayer, just as a regular taxpayer, forget council candidate. That would have been great.
Are you hearing anything from the business community? Are they concerned about the level of taxes?
What I hear a lot from them, it's not even the taxes so much, but it's the out of control spending, right? And they understand, just like I do, in that, as running a business, you can't continue to spend over and above what you're getting and expect that to be sustainable. So they understand and they think exactly the same way. Most of them. I can't paint everybody with the same brush, obviously.
All right. So when you're looking at the balance between business taxes and residential taxes, do you think the balance is about right? Or do you think there needs to be any kind of shift between the amount that residents pay versus to give businesses a break? I
think everybody needs a break. Businesses are paying, but that comes down to we go back to the budget and the overspending. And if we can bring that in line, then everybody gets a chance to save a few bucks. And again, a few bucks over 1 million plus people is going to save a lot of money.
All right, let's talk more about then the revenue side of the picture. From time to time, especially when there's a discussion about city charters, there is a parallel discussion happening about new taxation powers. Do you think that one of the things that Edmonton needs is to have the ability to levy new and different types of taxes?
I would rather not add taxes to an already stressed out tax base, to be honest with you. As it sits, the way the taxes are taken, I think it's fair. Where the disconnect kind of comes is in that relationship with the province. And I talked about that earlier, in having a relationship that isn't confrontational, working alongside a government to say, hey, this is what we as municipalities need. And anything over and above that is great, but this is kind of the baseline of where we need to sit. I think we need to remember, though, that we're all one taxpayer paying all three levels of government. So wherever some savings can be found is fantastic. And I think if we can start that at the municipal level, who knows, they might follow suit on a provincial level as well.
So when you look at the property tax bill, a large portion of it is the education property tax, which goes to the province. Are you satisfied with the way that relationship's working, or would you propose anything different about the split in those dollars?
Well, I mean, I just got my bill last week, actually, Danielle. So it's good timing in that, the education system obviously needs to be taken care of as well. And I mean, I have no problem paying my portion of that. I have no problem with the province taking that and moving it off. And I mean, realistically, I think the bill for me was $3,500 this year, and 800 of that was to the education. I have no issues with that, but I think as a city levy, we could bring the rest of that number down enough that it would make a difference.
Okay, you've talked a bit about infrastructure, so let's get into that a little. The Valley Line Southeast has suffered multiple significant delays during construction. What is your understanding of the reason for the delays, and is there anything that you think could have been done to avoid them?
I think a lot of it comes down to proper planning and coordination between departments and the contractors that are working there. I mean, a perfect example is the bridge over the White Mud on 66th on the overpass. They had just repaved the White Mud and added a lane in each direction, and they were open for all of a month and a half, and then they shut it down. And I went, uh-oh, this could be interesting how this is going to work. And that's exactly how it's been, just time after time. And I mean, realistically, residents of the area, I've got a friend who lives right beside where the line's coming. They've been disrupted in terms of their traffic patterns. Like, they haven't been able to get onto 66th Street because the rails are coming right through there. And I mean, realistically, we're building a streetcar that doesn't have crossing arms. I don't know how many people actually know that this train, rapid transit, is going to have to stop for every red light as well. So I don't know how effective it's going to be. I know a lot of people are angry with it, and I know people on the West End are frightened with what's coming in their direction based on the fact that the LRT is going to run down the main connector between the West End and downtown.
Well, let's talk about those, because there's big plans to build multiple future LRT extensions: Valley Line West, Metro Line Northwest, and the Capital Line South. So do you support this further LRT expansion, or do you think that there's another way to deliver the transportation needs in the city?
As it sits right now, no. As it's planned right now, not at all. Just based on what I've heard from people. Not that our ward is affected greatly by that, but just in general in the city, no. I mean, people are not happy with the Southeast line coming in as it is. And again, just hearing from people on the West Side that, no, this is not the way to go. And I mean, realistically, we're using 30-year-old technology as it sits with an operator needed. Go to Vancouver where the SkyTrain's automated. Why can't we do something along those lines? Like, it's going to be end of life technology fairly soon. So why are we investing that kind of money and that kind of planning into putting in something that is going to be out of date before it's built?
All right, let's talk about the economy, because I get the sense that a lot of problems go away when you are able to generate more income, because you're attracting more businesses, people are moving into the area, it generates more tax revenue. What would you do to get the economy hitting on all cylinders? Do you feel some optimism, or do you think there's some additional things that the city can do?
It comes down to working alongside those BIAs and really listening to what they have to say, because they're the people on the ground that are right there. Their job is to attract that business to their area. So what do they need from us as a city to make that happen? And obviously, like you said, you bring the business, the employees are going to follow, which brings out the new, and in terms of urban densification, that's obviously needed as well, but it has to be done properly. So, I mean, as long as you give them the ability to set up, operate, and be happy, attract the customers that are needed, that sort of thing, I think businesses can succeed and everything then falls into line. In terms of the economy itself, well, I mean, that's been an unknown for 15 months, aside from the fact that who knows what's next. So that's difficult for everybody in business. It has been for me. You see a lot of for lease signs down on White Avenue as well. And again, that makes me sad that businesses are having to shut down based on the fact that a pandemic has knocked them around quite a bit. So whatever we can do from their level, and I need to hear that from their representatives in the business districts. What can we do? How do we do it? What do you need?
Have they given you any suggestions? Do you think, are you in favor of direct incentives? Are you in favor of tax breaks? What kind of things would you be prepared to look at?
Tax breaks are nice in that it doesn't cost, and it's not 100% tax break by so many people think that. We give a tax break, well, that means they're not paying taxes for the first 5 years they're in operation. No, they pay a little bit less, but they still are contributing to the city as employers, as taxpayers, and bring it. Like, let's get them here. Let's make it a friendly place for them to operate. Part of what I think some, the tourist areas are a big one. And you look at Calgary and Eau Claire. Used to be able to drive through there. Now you have to park down there and walk in, but it attracts people to the area. I think if we can reduce the number of collisions between cars and pedestrians in a place like White Ave in Strathcona, I think that would be a phenomenal way. How do you do it? That has to be discussed with both the neighborhoods that are around there and the improvement district that's there.
All right. What about the role of oil and gas? Because it has been central to Alberta's economy for a long time. The city does spend a lot of time talking about renewable energy and a green shift. What role do you see oil and gas playing in fueling Edmonton's economy?
Oil and gas is still the driver of this nation's economy, Edmonton and Calgary being the two major cities right beside it. So I think that we can't completely shift away. I think it has to come down to, we have to realize that we still need oil and gas to this point. And we still need to develop oil and gas because the world's demand is going nowhere but up as the time sits. Yes, there needs to be a green shift, but it needs to be in conjunction with the fact that oil and gas still needs to operate. I mean, you can't take one and forget the other. And so many times that's been the way. We're going to green shift. So we're just going to forget about these companies over here. Well, no, these companies are paying your bills right now. Let's never forget that. And the hundreds and thousands of people, of Albertans and Edmontonians that they employ, that pay taxes on property, right? We cannot forget any one industry. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. One doesn't have to be the enemy of the other.
All right. I have a few questions I want to ask you about the issue of housing and attracting and providing affordable housing. I want to first begin by asking you, when I say affordable housing, what does that mean to you? Where do you think the biggest concerns are?
A lot of times what I've seen with affordable housing is there's so many multiple units in one place. And if you're trying to help somebody out of homelessness and the problems that come alongside with homelessness, the drug use, the crime, that sort of thing, if you collect them all together, as we saw with our tent city last year, I mean, they were mostly behaved, but there was a lot going on down there that we didn't see. And the area is still fenced off because is it cleaned properly? Are there still needles in there? Who knows, right? So I think if you put everybody together, it's going to, the problems are going to follow. A lot of times when it comes to addiction and that sort of thing, you need to get away from your old friends, if you want to call it that, in order to recover. And so if we're going to put everybody into affordable housing in one spot, guess what's going to happen? The problems are going to follow there. So I think it needs to be spread out. I think that can be incentivized to builders as well. And that way you're also not dealing with the NIMBYs, if you want to call them that, in that, well, no, we don't want an affordable house in our neighborhood. Well, if a builder is putting it up at the exact same time your house is going, and it's not 14 families in one, I think that makes it a much healthier place for somebody to climb out of the hole that they might be in.
All right. Let's talk a bit about some of that first-time home buyer issue of affordable housing, because there's a bit of a tension between, do you densify and build up, or do you allow for development on the outskirts so that people can get a single-family home? How do you look at that balance?
Again, it's got to be a full balance in that densifying is necessary. Infill is necessary, but it has to be done properly. It has to be done to follow the neighborhood plan that's laid out. People buy in these neighborhoods, these old neighborhoods, for the trees, for the camaraderie of neighbors. And if you change that up too much, or if you, I've heard from people, walking through some of our neighborhoods, there's some major infill going in, and they are angry about it because the housing doesn't match up to what's already there. And I mean, yes, it's going to be newer, it's going to be modern, it's going to look a little bit different, but if it can kind of fit in with what the neighborhood looks like, people are a lot more accepting of that. The developers also have to be responsible in when they're building, if they're stepping on the neighbor's property, the property lines have to knock down a fence, whatever, that they are rebuilding back to where it was before as well. So, and that's, again, knocking on somebody's door who has this gargantuan house being built next door. Now all of a sudden they're in the shade, which they didn't want when they first bought their house. And their foundation is cracking because the heavy equipment next door is disturbing the earth and that sort of thing. So they really have to be careful on that. But I mean, it has to be a balance of both. We still need to be able to go out and also densify inside the city wherever we can.
All right. Let me ask you about the 15-minute communities. Do you like the plan, or is there anything in the plan that concerns you?
Not particularly. I mean, I'm good with where it's at this point. I mean, again, once we're inside and we hear a lot more, because people, they don't mind sharing little things with us when we're at the doors, but once you're their counselor, they're happy to open up completely on where everything stands. So I think as it sits, I have no issue with where it is.
Okay, let me ask you about the Latchford area, former airport lands. The city claims that it's acting as its own developer, but it has not moved along, I don't think, as smoothly as the original plan had been laid out. What would you do about that?
I wish they never would have turned it from an airport in the first place, to be honest with you. Now, on that note, it's allowed us to build the third highest building in Canada, right downtown. But at the same time, it was a very useful airport for air ambulance and that sort of thing as well. But I mean, when you have an airport on a site for that length of time, the ground under it is going to be filled with jet fuel and spillage and that sort of thing. So, I mean, this is a symptom of a much larger problem in that our city council and sometimes the administration has gone to the point of, let's just do this and see what happens, as opposed to thinking through what the ramifications of said, we're not developers, we're a city. Like, worry about putting in the roads and the pipes and taking care of the soil. Let the developers develop.
All right. I have a few sort of quick questions I wanna get to as we're wrapping up here. Let me ask you about the issue of how you might find ways of bringing efficiencies by, for instance, through privatization. So you already have half the garbage collection that's private. Should the city privatize the remainder of garbage collection? Do you think that the operation of golf courses is an area that should be privatized? Are there any other, generally speaking, do you think there's a role for private sector in delivery of these services?
For me, it comes down to protection of the consumer, right? Protection of all Edmonton. If you look at some privatization, it's worked out well. Others have not. It's resulted in much higher costs to the people paying the bills. And so it comes down to, without seeing a full cost benefit analysis, I mean, I can't make that determination. It really comes down to, is it better for Edmontonians? Is it better for the people of my ward that we do this? Does it result in cost savings? Yes. Do we get the same or a better level of service? Yes. Then it's something to really consider strongly. If it doesn't, then no, flat out.
Okay, let's talk about the reduction in speed limits to 40 kilometers per hour. So I want to go further to 30 kilometers per hour. What's your view on that?
It's funny. And then you hear from the people that have to drive through a school or playground zone every day, and the timing of those. It's funny. The municipalities right around us have different rules for the same thing. And you don't hear of insane levels of accidents happening in those municipalities. So is it potentially frivolous in some areas? Yeah. Again, and I've said this to a lot of people. There is no one blanket statement that works for the entire city. If a neighborhood like Glenora wants to reduce their speed limit, if that neighborhood wants to, then that's who we should. Again, it comes that they're the ones that it affects. Is it a crazy expenditure in terms of speed limit signs that we're going to be spending here, $2 million in the next little while? Yeah. And so that's, again, does it need to happen citywide or just in this core neighborhood? Or that if it's one neighborhood and they are behind it, great. If they're not, why are we doing it to them?
All right. Let me ask you, I'm looking at a picture right now of the new think tank library downtown. Do you love it or do you hate it?
The library, it is a tank, to say the very least.
It is a tank.
Again, functional as a library before, yes. Did we need the additional, and this goes to the art installation clause in all of our major projects. Does that much money need to be spent on making things look different? I guess that's probably the politically correct way to say that. I don't think so. At the same time, do we need to continue to put in art and allow that expression? Yes. But why aren't we using Edmonton-based artists to do this? Our stack of silver balls in the white mud was not done by an Edmontonian. I think an Edmontonian would be a fantastic person to approach and be able to build things like that. And they know the feel, the vibe of each neighborhood, of each city, or of each area. Like, let them do it, as opposed to somebody who has no concept of what Edmonton actually is.
All right. I've got a couple of questions related to your role as a council member. So let me ask this first one, because there is going to be a referendum on the ballot. It's a provincial referendum question. But from time to time, municipalities also put forward referendum questions. Can you think of a good candidate for a question that should be on the ballot in the fall? Or do you generally support, as an elected council member, making more of those decisions yourself?
Well, I think what needs to happen, I mean, the provincial referendum, yeah, fantastic. Glad that they're asking that question of people, and hopefully they word it properly. I mean, that's always been a big thing with referendums, is was it worded correctly so people could easily understand it. If it's a major enough decision, then it needs to go to referendum if it's big enough. Smaller neighborhood type decisions, not so much. But again, as a counselor, it's my job to advocate for the people that I represent. So you need to be accessible. And I've heard that in some areas of our ward, that hasn't happened over the last number of years. You need to respond to people when they contact you. You need to, and not just some canned response either. You need to, if you need to step up for the people, you need to be there for them. And I think part of what I want to do, now to get into a little political toot my own horn sort of thing, I really want to be able to go out and have coffee every couple of weeks at a locally owned coffee shop somewhere in the ward, and I'll buy coffee and people can come and bring the issues to me. And I am there to listen. And that's my entire job as a counselor, is to advocate for the neighborhoods inside my ward at the council table. Doesn't mean I'm going to win every time, but at least they know that I spoke up for them.
Well, it's a perfect transition into my last question, because sometimes you're going to have an issue where the city administration is recommending something that they say will be good for Edmonton as a whole, but your constituents are going to want you to vote a different way. What would you do in those circumstances?
It's what the constituents want. It's really them. I work for them. I don't work for myself. I have my own ideas. I have where I kind of stand on things, but really it comes down to what the ward says to me. And it's the old adage, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If you talk a lot, right? I'll vote against administration's recommendation if I need to, if that's what the people want. That's really where it comes in.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the conversation today. I sure appreciate it.
Thank you, Danielle. Appreciate it.
Now, that was Tarcy Schindelka. He is your candidate for Ward 8, Papastew. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Danielle.